is written, many directions for the aid that was given. They gave us pieces of silver and pieces of gold. Tell me who paid reparations on my soul. Many fine speeches, oh yeah, from the White House stairs, written on the cue cards that were never really there. Yes, but the heat in the summer was there and the freezing winter's cold. Now tell me who paid reparations on my soul. Oh, my brother say he ain't got no job, no job, no job. So my old man to leave me when times got hard, so hard. So my mother, she's got to carry me all by herself. And now that I wanna be a man, can't depend on no one else. Oh yeah. And what about the red man who met you at the coast? You never dictionary, always had to have the most. And what about Mississippi, the boundary of old? Tell me who paid reparations on my soul. Yeah. Call my brother a junkie to say he ain't got no job, no job, no job. So my old man to leave me when times got hard, so hard. So my mother, she's got to carry me all by herself. Wanna be a man and can't depend on no one else. Oh yeah. What about the red man who met you at the coast? You never dictionary, always had to have the most. And what about Mississippi, the boundaries of old? Tell me who paid reparations on my soul. Many fine speeches, oh yeah, from the White House stairs, written on the cue cards that were never really there. Yes, but the heat in the summer was there and the freezing winter cold. Tell me who paid reparations on my soul. Who paid reparations? 'Cause I don't dig segregation, but I can't get integration. I got to take it to the United Nations. Someone to help me away from this station. Tell me who paid reparations on my soul.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jean-Pierre Brutus. I am a senior counsel in the Economic Justice Program at the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice, and I'm also the convener of New Jersey Reparations Council. Welcome to all of you to the ninth and last public session of the New Jersey Reparations Council, hosted by last but not least, the Public Education and Narrative Committee. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I just want to let you all know that this meeting is being recorded and live streamed on YouTube. Press is in attendance to listen only. Closed captioning is available for anyone who needs it. Just hit the appropriate button. In the first part of this session, the committee will discuss the work of the Public Education and Narratives Committee, and the second half of the session will be open to the public for public comment. As I stated earlier, this is the last public session of the council. The council's next public event will be held on Juneteenth, Thursday, June 19th, for the release of the council's final report with reparative policy recommendations, held at the New Jersey Performing Arts Center indoor, in person. Please join us. Please be on the lookout for publicity for that session in the next few months. You can go to njreparationscouncil.org. I'll repeat that once again, njreparationscouncil.org to find out more about our Juneteenth event. Thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you to our partners at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation for making the New Jersey Reparations Council possible. You will hear shortly from Amber Randolph, First Associate Vice President, New Jersey at the Foundation. Tonight, you will also hear from the members of the Public Education and Narrative Committee, co-directors Dreesen Heath and Kenya Tyson, members Tim Eatman, Dion Ford, Mark Krasovic, and Jennifer Taylor, as well as their invited guests. Discussion will be moderated by Council Co-Chair, Professor Khalil Gibran Mohammed, and then we will open up to public comment after that. The question we often confront doing this work here is, why convene the New Jersey Reparations Council? And to answer that is, although slavery shaped every aspect of New Jersey, too many people in our state simply believe that it never happened here and that racial inequality is not a New Jersey issue. But as you will hear tonight, New Jersey's original sin of slavery and its lasting stain tell a very different story. Co-chaired by Khalil Gibran Mohammed and Tajania Henderson, and comprised of local, state, and national experts, the New Jersey Reparations Council is finally confronting and working to repair the enduring harm from New Jersey's deep and often overlooked institution of slavery and enduring impact on the contemporary life of Black people in our state. Because these inequalities have been reinforced not by individual behaviors, but by generations of policy design rooted in slavery, they must be repaired by policy design. The council will not only propose bold strategic policies to repair the enduring harms of slavery to Black people from slavery, but it will also answer this foundational question. What kinds of reparative systems does New Jersey need to build for Black people to finally be free to thrive, free to win, free to be whole? Our affirmative vision for the council is to think boldly and imaginatively, to propose solutions that address the varied and manifold harms of slavery and address the structural racism at the core of these harms through reparative policies and investments that are commensurate and proportional to the enduring harms from slavery. As I stated earlier, this Juneteenth, the council will produce its final report, drawing direct connection between New Jersey's history and its present, and propose comprehensive policy recommendations that will serve on their own as a blueprint for how New Jersey can repair the enduring harms of slavery, and also act as a vast resource to the New Jersey Reparations Task Force that the state will ultimately create through law, thanks to the ongoing advocacy of our faith allies and reparations partners. As we look ahead to the council's work, it is both thrilling and daunting, to be sure, but the only way through is forward to building a new New Jersey. We are convinced that every movement for racial justice, particularly in this moment, requires fierce and independent advocates to lift their voice when others won't. We are also convinced that New Jersey Reparations Council, building on decades-long fight in this state, will help to move the issue of reparations from unsafe and unpalatable and impossible to inevitable and conventional wisdom, good sense, common sense. Reparations as good sense. And so we thank you to all of you for standing us with us in this journey. It is now my pleasure and honor to pass the mic to Amber Randolph, First Associate Vice President of New Jersey at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation.
Thank you, Jean-Pierre. Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for the opportunity to join you here tonight. For those who don't know me, as Jean-Pierre said, I am Amber Randolph, AVP of New Jersey at the RWJF. I am grateful to be here with you all tonight amid Black History Month and this evolving public policy landscape. We remain focused and collaborative on how to collectively advance health equity in the face of unprecedented change. I'd like to first acknowledge and respect how many of us are feeling as the past few weeks have unfolded, and as we seek to interpret the implications of federal orders on our work and our well-being and that of our loved ones, and the long-term strategies to achieve health equity in our home state. In the face of this tremendous uncertainty, I assure you that this remains clear. We at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation are steadfastly committed to achieving health equity in New Jersey and ensuring that our state is a place where everyone has a fair and just opportunity to live their healthiest life. With shifts in diversity, equity, and inclusion principles and how organizations assess the very values and missions they are founded upon, the current reality remains. Deep, persistent, and increasing gaps in opportunities for health and well-being still persist across neighborhoods and communities depending on who you are and where you live. We believe deeply in dismantling structural racism and the barriers that millions face every day simply because of their race or their intersectionality with other groups that experience oppression. We all have a responsibility and the ability to achieve health equity by striving for racial equity and treating the root cause of disparities. Doing this right requires a great deal of research, planning, and public dialogue. Since 2021, RWJF has funded various efforts, to learn how reparations experiences in other communities could close racial health and wealth gaps that persistently impact Black, Latinx, and Indigenous people, and to learn how to strengthen the reparations field directly by supporting organizing efforts, capacity building, and technical assistance to drive federal, state, and local policy action that's consistent with our values. And even with this learning, we still have so much more to do. At our WJF, we are looking closely at our philanthropic practices, efforts, and impact, so we can continue to explore opportunities to change approaches that meet our mission on today's terms and where communities need us most. Amid a national retreat on our core values and principles, our continued learning and effort remains vital to maintain the momentum so that we can acknowledge, learn from, and not repeat any past missteps. The Foundation is a proud supporter of the New Jersey Reparations Council and its efforts to convene a non-governmental process to initiate the necessary work to address past, present, and systemic harms. The Council's work to date has been fundamental in realizing and addressing the justice that our governments owe to Black New Jerseyans. This committee was assembled to evaluate how slavery and African American history is taught in our classrooms, and about how we understand the afterlife of racialized oppression across our communities and throughout the state. This is critical work, and we are at a time when many feel like we're backsliding on progress to ensure that the US is truly a place with liberty and justice for all, which is why I'm so grateful, deeply grateful, for the support and collaboration of this Public Education and Narrative Committee and the entire New Jersey Reparations Council in taking this work on with grace, intention, and purpose to maximize impact and remain accountable to New Jerseyans' health and well-being. Together, we have an opportunity to set a national example by educating and addressing structural racism in a thoughtful and comprehensive manner. Our commitment to do so is rooted in our dedication to health equity and to justice. This Black History Month and truly every month, we remain committed to breaking down obstacles by advancing policies that create lasting change. Because when we work together, a healthier and more equitable future is, in fact, possible. The Foundation stands proud to be on this journey with you all and eager to engage in the hard work ahead that is required, particularly in the face of the shifting landscape and the implications those decisions seek to pose on us all. This is the beginning of a new chapter, a new era that we should embrace as an opportunity for innovation and clarity. Thank you again for the opportunity to be here today. With that, I conclude my remarks and turn it back over to Jean-Pierre. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Amber, and thank you to you and the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation for your steadfast support of the New Jersey Reparations Council. It is now my honor to introduce one of our two co-chairs of the New Jersey Reparations Council, Professor Khalil Gibran Muhammad. Professor Muhammad is Professor of African American Studies and Public Affairs at the School of Public and International Affairs and the Department of African American Studies at Princeton University. He directs the Institutional Anti-Racism and Accountability Project. Prior to joining Princeton, Khalil was a Ford Foundation Professor of History, Race, and Public Policy at Harvard Kennedy School, and is the former director of the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, a division of the New York Public Library, and the world's leading library and archive of global Black history. Before leading the Schomburg Center, Khalil was an associate professor at Indiana University. Please welcome and join me in welcoming Professor Khalil Gibran Muhammad.
Thank you so much, Jean-Pierre. And I want to thank Amber as well for your steadfast commitment to this work on behalf of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. We are living through an unprecedented moment of the destruction and dismantling of the basic rules of law that exist in this society, those laws often working against the very premise of why we gather here tonight, and yet and still in that infrastructure of accountability and constitutional governance and liberal democracy, we see precisely what authoritarianism and fascism looks like. Black people experience these forms of tyranny and oppression for much of the history of this country. It is most certainly a fallacy and a lie in most history books that a multiracial democracy worked in this country prior to 1965, and yet and still here we are, watching it be dismantled, one decision, one agency takeover, one firing at a time. And for that reason, I am incredibly grateful to be joined by so many committed thinkers, activists, advocates, organizers, people who have spent much, if not all, of their professional lives dedicated to the work of understanding how oppression works and teaching others how to recognize it and doing what they can to lean in it into dismantling it. And so tonight's work remains our North Star, the commitment of the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice to convene a reparations task force where the state of New Jersey refused to do so is our charge, it is our challenge, and it continues to be the commitment of all of you to making this work real and relevant. I know that many of us have to bite back the cynicism that we experience in times like these, the sense that there is no point, but rest assured, these cycles come and go, and we stand ready on the precipice of a new tomorrow to begin again, to ensure that we recognize that the past matters and that we are prepared to embrace a future that is different than where we've come from. And with that, I want to introduce the Public Education and Narrative Committee, the folks who are going to present the work of this committee to you and to take your feedback into consideration as we prepare for our final report. I'm going to introduce them in order as they will appear over the next hour with their presentations. It won't be necessarily easy to remember all their biographical details, but everything about them is available online, and you can find it at the Reparations Council's website. To get us started, we're going to first hear from Jennifer Taylor. She is a lecturer in law, clinical lecturer in law, an associate research scholar, and the executive director of the Arthur Lyman Center for Public Interest Law at Yale Law School. From 2010 to 2022, Taylor served as an attorney at the Equal Justice Initiative in Montgomery, Alabama. She served as a visiting researcher at the Wits Justice Project in Johannesburg, South Africa for several months in 2014 and 15, and she interned with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund as a law student. And so to keep the flow going, I'm going to introduce everyone else, and then I'll let you in, Jennifer. Next, we'll hear from Mark Krasovich. Since coming to Rutgers in 2008 as the Gerald R. Dodge Postdoctoral Fellow at the Clement A. Price Institute, Mark has been involved in an array of publicly engaged projects. He's currently the principal investigator on a Mellon Foundation-funded racial reparations project. He has also been active in collecting oral interviews in support of the archival efforts of Algira, a Center for Contemporary Art, which will form the basis of his second book. His first book, called The Newark Frontier, Community Action in the Great Society, is a very important treatment of the war on poverty and its local presence in the city of Newark. He serves on the steering committees for the Ironbound Community Corporation Archives, the Newark Historical Society, and the Northeastern Public Humanities Consortium. After Mark, we'll hear from Kenya Tyson, is an internationally recognized criminal justice expert and higher education executive with expertise in race, crime, and inequality. Kenya is the Senior Associate Provost at Dartmouth College. She has also served as Assistant Provost of Academic Affairs and University Curriculum at the New School in New York City and the Associate Dean of Academic Programs and Student Services, formerly at Rutgers University School of Criminal Justice. Kenya is the founder and executive director of the Black Massacre Project. The Massacre Project is an independent public research center that explores the historical race massacres perpetrated against Black communities in the United States. Her work includes consultation and work alongside and with the U.S. Department of Justice Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, as well as the New Jersey Law and Education Empowerment Project. After Kenya, you'll hear from Professor Timothy K. Eatman, an educational sociologist and publicly engaged scholar who serves as the inaugural dean of the Honors Living Learning Community Center and a professor of urban education at Rutgers University, Newark. Prior to this current appointment, his primary network of scholarly operations and leaderships was with the National Consortium Imagining America, Artists and Scholars in Public Life. Tim is in his second term on the board of directors of the American Association of Colleges and Universities, serving as chair of the membership committee. Also, with the AAC&U, Tim serves as a faculty member on the Institute on High Impact Practices for Student Success. Dion Ford will follow Timothy. She is the author of a memoir, Go Back and Get It, published in 2023, and she is a co-editor of the anthology Slavery's Descendants, Shared Legacies of Race and Reconciliation. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, LitHub, New Jersey Monthly, Rumpus, and Ebony, among other publications. In 2018, she received a National Endowment of the Arts in Creative Writing, grants from the Sustainable Arts Foundation and Gerald R. Dodge Foundation. She also holds an FFA in creative writing from New York University and teaches creative writing. And Dreesen Heath will conclude our formal presentation before we open up for a public session. Dreesen is the founder of the Why We Can't Wait Coalition, a national coalition of hundreds of organizations, including internationally based and US-based national and grassroots organizations seeking to advance comprehensive reparations at all levels. In May 2023, in partnership with former Congresswoman Cori Bush, she helped author and introduce historic reparations legislation, which provides a comprehensive framework for a federal reparations program for the legacy of slavery, a framework that never existed in the congressional record prior. He most recently led Human Rights Watch's racial justice and reparations work as a researcher and advocate in their program on the United States from 2018 to 2013. She has also authored significant research reports and publications, including The Case for Reparations in Tulsa, Oklahoma, a human rights argument, which is cited in the historic lawsuit brought under Oklahoma's public nuisance law on behalf of 3 known living survivors of the 1921 massacre. She's testified as an expert witness before U.S. Congress. She's worked with the Director and Counsel of the Brennan Center for Justice's Washington, D.C. office, as well as a researcher at the Center for Research and Education and Social Policy. Heath has been published in a number of magazines and newspapers on her work. And with that, I am honored to get us started. And first, we'll hear from Jennifer Taylor.
Hello, everyone. I'm happy to have the opportunity to kind of initiate our conversation by talking a bit about our purpose as a part of our council. The work of our council overall is to aim to inform and encourage a useful conversation about the history of New Jersey and the need for reparations for African Americans. Our work is to kind of take a step back from our research and information that we are adding to the conversation as a council, and to acknowledge that we understand that this is a conversation that isn't new, and that as we approach it, we are not on a canvas that is empty. We're acknowledging that if we start a conversation by talking about Black history in New Jersey, anyone that we are talking to already has an idea of what that is and how important it is, and if it's even a conversation that they are interested in having. And so our purpose and our aim has been to try to unpack what has an impact on all of that. What do you hear when we say that we're interested in having a conversation about Black history in New Jersey and the need for reparations? What information do you have already? What information is new to you? And who has had a hand in helping to influence what you already know? I come to this project as a lawyer and a writer and a researcher who has done work on African American history, but also as a person who doesn't have personal ties to New Jersey. And being a part of this project has been a valuable opportunity to kind of hear and learn and challenge what I know, and what assumptions I had already. And it's also been an opportunity to hear from others who are often newly learning that it took the 13th Amendment to actually end enslavement in New Jersey, and it took the the 15th Amendment to actually enable African American men in the state to participate in the political process. That's often not an assumption that when talking about a state in the North, but it is the history of New Jersey. People are also often surprised to hear that there is a history of lynching in New Jersey. And so as we are uncovering and offering that information, we're also aiming to unpack as New Jersey has throughout its history been kind of telling a story about itself and who it is, who has been making a choice about what to include and what not to include. How has that information been offered in our agencies of history, in our state archives, in our education, and how have others outside of those agencies made an effort to add to that narrative and fill holes that existed. That's the kind of information that we're aiming to add here, and also hopefully to hear from others about what you already know about this history and how you have learned it. We've made an effort up to this point to speak to people who are educators and who are involved in public history, and that's also why it's so important for us to be here and to have this opportunity to hear from all of you. As you've heard already, our event here is our council's last opportunity to hear from the community in this kind of a way. It's also the only of these events taking place after the inauguration. We are currently witnessing the power and impact of narrative, and in some ways, having a conversation and doing a project about reparations for African Americans is an even more challenging effort now than it was at the time that we initiated our council. And so I think that's why it is especially important for us to be here having this conversation and to be proactive about talking about not only the truth of what has happened, but also what choices and intentional efforts have had a hand in erecting obstacles to efforts to acknowledge it and honor it, and how we can aim to overcome that now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I really appreciate you setting the framework for the remainder of our presentations today. And you made such a crisp point about the power of narrative and the power of education, particularly in this case, public history, public memory, collective memory, national narratives. So much of what has animated the attack on Black history has been an argument that these histories of what Black people experienced make white people feel bad and are quote unquote divisive and thus should be shut down. And so clearly we understand what it looks like to have a narrative that is whitewashed, that is stripped of meaning and accuracy when it comes to the full story. And so anyone who is listening to a conversation like this and says, why do you spend so much time educating the public, talking about the public, evoking these histories? The most powerful object lesson is happening right in front of our eyes, particularly with this administration. So we're going to turn to Mark at this time. Thank you very much, Jennifer. And Mark, to get us started, I thought I'd just sort of set the stage here. So you've been surveying the history of how slavery in New Jersey has or hasn't been studied and written and otherwise publicly told, with an eye toward what that means for current reparative efforts. What have you been finding? Share with us, please.
Will do. Good evening, everybody, and thanks for that question, Khalil, and thanks, Jennifer, for sort of framing the work of our subcommittee so powerfully. The shortest answer to that question, what have we been finding about the ways that the history of slavery has been told in New Jersey is actually more than I expected, I think, but less and less critical than there needs to be. And the shortcoming, I think, is one less of quantity and more one of narrative. So I've been spending with colleagues at Rutgers Newark, colleagues and students, spending the last 3 years researching slavery in Newark and learning to appreciate it, not as an episode just to be compared to other places, but as one iteration of a larger system. That is asking not just how slavery in Newark is different, but seeing it as one branch of a network that connects Newark to other places in New Jersey, to other states, to southern colonies in the states, to the Caribbean, to England, and to Africa. And so on this committee, that interest in connective thinking manifests as a consideration of narrative. As a focus on how the history is told, not just if it's told. For example, how is the relationship of slavery to New Jersey political, economic, and social life explained? What about its relationship to the larger systems of white supremacy and global racial capitalism, of which it was just one outpost? And what is its relationship to subsequent history and our present day? So I've been, I for the most part grew up in New Jersey, but never really studied New Jersey history outside of the work I've done on Newark. And so I've been learning in these past few years a lot of the content of New Jersey history, but also a lot about sort of the historical infrastructure or the history telling infrastructure in the state. What work already exists, what archives and sources are available, what still needs to be done. And that's what I want to talk a bit about today. So if I could have the next slide, please. And I want to say, at the outset that there are several wonderful, relatively recent academic books that have considered the history of slavery in New Jersey. James Gigantino's Ragged Road to Abolition, Henrik Hartog's The Trouble with Mina, and several of Graham Hodge's books, including most recently Black New Jersey. But I actually want to go back, over 100 years to another sort of, I think, pretty substantial wave of turn of the 20th century scholarship that considered to varying degrees the history of slavery in New Jersey. Next slide, please. And I would, as I would encourage folks to, visit your local public library and, if it has especially a local history room or some local history shelves, and check out, what I I bet you will find many histories of your town, of your county, some broad histories of the state from that turn of the 20th century era. So much of this, as we found, was written in the very boosterish mode of the era's progressive history, as it's often called. That is narratives driven by the industrial era idea that the nation's history was progressing inexorably toward its divine destiny as the world's beacon of liberty. And in these histories, often Southern slavery was presented as the preeminent challenge to that destiny, while Northern states just worked to fulfill that destiny. And one result of that perspective, that peculiar framing, was often the portrayal of slavery as having only very shallow roots in Northern soil. And so while I think these works do contain truly valuable detail, and I do encourage people to check them out, but that value has to be extracted from that rather specious progressive framing, which often produces in these works some moments of contradiction and tension, some jarring dissonance, and at times outright error as they attempt to square slavery with the dictates of progressive history. And the next slide, please. And so these were the covers, and here are some excerpts from three just sort of randomly sampled books. Francis Baisley Lee's 1902 New Jersey as a Colony and a State, which is a 4-volume work. Henry Schofield Cooley's A Study of Slavery in New Jersey from 1896, which is one of the very few works from this era to focus specifically on slavery, and Joseph Atkinson's 1878 History of Newark. And in the interest of time, I'll just invite you to read these excerpts. But again, to know that each of these works contains a wealth of detail about slavery in New Jersey, about its legal apparatus, about various pieces of legislation that administered and regulated it. But in the end, all of these details, important as they are put in service of a sort of rushed and often error-filled portrait of anti-slavery sentiment and the institutions end in New Jersey. So, while the road to abolition in New Jersey was, as James Gigantino put it, ragged, these earlier generations of historians, I think, attempted a sort of narrative smoothing. The horrors of the institution in New Jersey, legal, political, corporal, are often discernible in this work, but the foundational progressive orientation of the writing positions the institution firmly in the past, as what has been overcome, rather than as one articulation of an adaptable and persistent historical system of white supremacy. And one consequence of that narrative orientation, I think, is the relative absence of Black life from these state and local histories after emancipation. That is, even as the books continue, their accounts beyond the Civil War and beyond emancipation, Black New Jerseyans virtually drop out of the story. The persistence of badges of slavery, would not suit the dictates of this progressive history. Next slide, please. And so it would take, subsequent generations of 20th century Black historians to bring a more rigorous and scholarly attention back onto Black New Jersey history, beginning in the 1940s with the all-important, amazing Marion Thompson Wright in her landmark 1941 book, The Education of Negroes in New Jersey, as well as several essays in the Journal of Negro History and the Journal of Negro Education, which she published in the 40s. That's her on the left. Next to her is Simeon Moss, who wrote a really important essay, The Persistence of Slavery and Involuntary Servitude in a Free State, which was New Jersey. And that was printed in the Journal of Negro History in 1950. And Marion Thompson Wright in particular helped inspire a subsequent generation of New Jersey historians, many of whom were trained in the 1960s sort of social history, history from the ground up movement. And here I've included Clement A. Price and Giles Wright, both of whom I was honored to have known. And it was people like Clem and Giles and others who in turn intersected in the 1960s and the 1970s with the birth of state arts and humanities councils, as well as the early years of the New Jersey Historical Commission. Giles Wright was the inaugural head of its African American history program, which is now led by the incomparable Noelle Lorraine Williams. But I suspect that all of them, Clem, Giles, Noelle, would agree with me that even as Black New Jersey history fought for its foothold in the academy and in state institutions, there existed one, persistent and consistent strain of dedicated inquiry into this history, and that is that done by innumerable and often uncredited or underappreciated local historians and knowledge keepers, neighborhood and community organizations, historical sites and museums and societies. In fact, when Clem Price and Giles Wright helped organize one of the earliest, as far as I can tell, statewide Black history efforts, the early 1980s New Jersey Black Historic Places Survey, they not only consulted, university libraries and museums and archives, but also conducted what they called windshield surveys, which seems to have meant that they just drove around and stopped people on the street and asked them about their local history and sites that were, meaningful to them. So when it comes to studying and presenting Black New Jersey history, I think we really need to appreciate and foreground the energetic community-based work of numerous historical homes and churches, burial grounds, town and county historical societies, at least as much, if not more than, university-based scholars. So next slide, please. So I offer you, for instance, just as some examples of this, our Reparations Council colleagues, Elaine Buck and Beverly Mills in the Stoutsburg Sauerland African American Museum, and the sort of amazing, I consider pioneering work that they've done in that region. And here's an image of the Mount Zion AME Church, which is in Montgomery, which is one of the sites that they maintain. A few miles north of where I sit right now is the Pennington African Cemetery. And a few miles south of where I sit is the William Trent House. And here is a page from Trent's trade ledgers, which included entries buying and selling enslaved workers to customers in Philadelphia in the West Indies. And so I encourage anyone who's interested or so motivated to, look around you. The chances are there's someone doing similar research and commemorative and educational work nearby. So I think, any effort to promote history as part of a cycle or a process of repair must not only, recognize, but must invest in those local efforts. Must invest in access, widespread access to research material, to databases, to digitization projects, to archives, via public institutions like schools and libraries. Many of those early histories that I referred to earlier are digitized and available online, but I'm not sure, though, how widespread the access to the databases that contain them, are. And we must also, I think, invest in new articulations of that history. I know the organizers of this council are thinking about creative ways to present its findings. Next slide, please. And in Newark, in our reparations work in Newark, we engaged a small cadre of Newark-based artists and shared with them some of the archival material we had on enslaved Newarkers, and asked them to, through whatever artwork, whatever form that they work in, to take these oftentimes very thin, very brief archival slivers of a life and sort of breathe life back in to these figures who are mentioned in the archives, to imagine them as multidimensional, human beings through their artwork, even as the archive, sort of fights against that effort. So here's one example of a wonderful friend and colleague and artist, T. Strong, who was really gripped by some of the so-called runaway slave ads that were printed in local Newark newspapers, and imagined this one married couple, Bill and Hannah, in a painting that she did. So while we're encouraging that sort of investment in the production of history, we also want to encourage a narrative approach that connects individual New Jersey stories to each other, such that the broader state system in which those stories played out comes into clearer focus. That also connects them to other scales of history, the national and international dynamics that help shape the local and vice versa. And finally, to connect those stories to our present day, such that an accurate and critical assessment of the state of racial justice in New Jersey can be developed. And as we are in this era of public funding challenges, of curricula and books being challenged and removed, Google removing Black History Month from our calendars, apparently. I think we should double down on these local infrastructures of history making and on the relationships we might build between them and the resources of the academy and the reparations movement writ large. And that, to me, would help us produce a meaningful and truly progressive history that is one that can serve the process of repair. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. I'm struck by a number of things. First, to just acknowledge that you work at the Clem Price Institute. And the first time I ever TA'd as a graduate student at Rutgers University in 1996, I TA'd for Clem, who was teaching a course on Paul Robeson, and who was actively at the time helping to consult on a civil rights memorial in Atlantic City, and sent me for the first time, I was 23 years old, to the Schomburg Center as a researcher. I'd been before as a kid, but I went for the first time on behalf of Clement Price to pull photographs from the Photo and Prints Division. So the one takeaway here is that Black scholars matter. And that's part of the arc of the story that you just told, and that's part of the legacy that we are hoping to build on, or are building on, in this reparations study. I also want to mention just very briefly that as the report argues, and that you will read soon enough, part of what is disruptive here of this narrative of slavery is that slavery existed at all in the northern colonies and then in northern states like New Jersey. It is remarkable that in this day and age, even in my classroom, I've had to disrupt the notion that slavery was no big deal. And the last point on this, one of the things you noted amongst the slavery distorters from an earlier period evokes Ron DeSantis's revised curriculum, social studies curriculum in Florida. And I'll just read from what you presented, Mark. You said that one of the texts reads here that slaves were on the whole well treated. That one could be found who was literate, which is meant to be a credit to white people and not to that enslaved person's resistance, and that some enslaved people played the violin. And it reminds me of DeSantis saying that because enslaved people had skills, it could not have been as bad as it suggested, and that be taught. So we have a national problem, and of course that national problem rests and sits here with us. And thank goodness the local infrastructure that you just described is being built, that people are working towards revising and telling the truth of New Jersey's past. So thank you very much, Mark. At this time, I want to introduce Kenya Tyson, and I'm going to start Kenya off with a question here. Kenya, how have anti-Black policies and practices influenced the presentation and visibility of Black voices and histories in educational institutions, both across the nation and specifically here in New Jersey?
So good evening, everybody, and thanks for the question, Khalil. I'll just start by saying that this particular topic really resonated with me as a lawyer and a researcher and an educator, because over the years, I've been able to actually see the connection between anti-Black legislation and policies. And the erasure and distortion of Black history, right? And so anti-Black policies and practices have certainly been affected, have affected the way that Black voices and histories have been represented and recognized in our society. And these policies and practices often lead to this marginalization and erasure of Black experiences, all of which have contributed to this narrative, a very dangerous narrative, that reparations within the state or even in a national context are either unnecessary, too intangible, or too attainable. And I think there's a direct connection between that thought process and this erasure of Black history and Black people and Black narratives within education. So if you could turn to the next slide, please. Okay, and so this is a quote that I'm going to talk a little bit about in just a moment, but just to give a bit of historical context, you know, this marginalization of Black narratives is firmly rooted in America's long history of systemic racism and exclusion within the United States educational system, not just here in New Jersey, but all across the country, as Khalil just alluded to. And so this is actually a quote which of course states, if the free colored people were taught to read, it would be an inducement for them to stay in the country. We would offer them no such inducement, right? And so this particular quote was part of an article that was in the Anti-Slavery Almanac. And so it's really just an illustration of this mindset around really kind of keeping or tamping down Black narratives. And so could you go to the next slide? I really wanted to point out the quote there, but what I'm showing you now on this slide is an image that again appeared in an American Anti-Slavery Almanac. It appeared in 1939, so during slavery, and what it does is it depicts a white schoolmaster preventing a free Black woman and her 2 children from entering the school. But if you look closely, you can see that there's a line of white children entering the school without incident. And this is so indicative of what we experienced here in the state of New Jersey prior to the official end of the slave trade here in the United States. And so again, you have the quote there, but that quote actually, the original quote actually comes from the Southern Religious Telegraph and was written by a minister. And so I know we've already had the public session on, you know, the connection between religion and spirituality and reparations, but I think that we will see a theme of education, the intersection between education and religion, and a lot of other issues related to our society. Okay, and so, but what this image really does is it illustrates from the earliest days of American history that education has been a battleground for racial equality. And of course, we know that starting with slavery, Black people were legally prohibited from learning to read and write in most Southern states to maintain control over enslaved populations. I think that's something that we all have a grounding in terms of that notion, but this restriction followed Black people to Northern states as well. And post-emancipation, those efforts to educate Black people faced a lot of violent resistance. With Black schools often being underfunded. I think that kind of goes without saying, that's continues to be an issue amongst Black communities, but those schools were targeted and even burned. The people in those schools, both the teachers and students were terrorized by white supremacist groups. And so that's, you know, after slavery ended, that's something that was experienced by those who were trying to become educated. But in post-Reconstruction, in that Jim Crow era, there were a number of Jim Crow laws that really kind of entrenched that racial segregation into the education system And so Black students were systemically underfunded, with students receiving fewer resources, outdated textbooks, and substandard facilities, particularly compared to white schools. And this, again, was the case here in the state of New Jersey and other northern states, right? But nevertheless, Black communities and their allies we established our own schools and colleges. And, we know many of those colleges today to be historically Black colleges and universities, or HBCUs. And I think most of us at this point know that HBCUs historically have been vital institutions for not only Black education, but leadership development. And we had the ability to control the curricula in those schools, certainly to a certain extent. But when it came to public education, that was a much different process. I think most of us are familiar with Brown versus Board of Education, which was a Supreme Court decision in 1954 that declared that racial segregation in public schools was unconstitutional. And so for many, that signaled, an educational equity victory, so to speak. However, desegregation was a whole nother matter in itself. And people who attempted to segregate institutions, faced this widespread resistance. And I know that there are some of us on the line now that actually recall those experiences. But there was a massive resistance movement, which oftentimes employed very violent tactics to avoid or delay interrogation. And that's something that was experienced all across this country. And, there were some cities and states, including in my home state of North Carolina, where, the government just closed the public schools rather than to permit desegregation. And so that's a really interesting concept, but one that I think that many of us could identify with the current state of affairs. Next slide, please. Right, and so actually, could you go back a couple of slides? Right, so what you see here is a New York Times article, and there are just a number of articles that really kind of capture this, but this is one that I pulled. In this particular slide, it's a New York Times article that discusses James Meredith's attempt to integrate the University of Mississippi. And as you can see from the headline, it was a pretty serious situation post Brown versus Board of Education. But as you could see, it took hundreds of law enforcement to help him even get into the grounds of the school. So there was a lot of active resistance on the part of government, on the part of citizens. That was just, the situation. But even post Brown versus Board of Education, during the Civil Rights era, legal segregation was dismantled, but there were more subtle forms of exclusion as it related to Black people being a part of the curricula of various schools and universities. And so as a result of that, throughout much of the 20th century, US history textbooks ignored or worse, misrepresented Black history. And so the contributions of Black leaders, inventors, and activists were either minimized or just completely left out of curricula across the country. And even something as terrible as slavery was downplayed in its brutality. And so the civil rights movement absolutely brought attention, however, to the need for comprehensive Black history education. And so in 1976, we started to experience Black History Month. And, even much later here in the state of New Jersey, we got the Amistad Law, and that required, the Amistad Law required inclusion of Black history, African American history, and social studies curricula to address some of those gaps in representation. And Black History Month provided a platform for public institutions and private alike to focus the curricula on certain aspects of Black history, right? And so even though you have those efforts to advance Black representation, this is a cycle, right? We start to provide our students with additional information about Black history, or to incorporate that information into the current curricula, and then there's a rollback. And so just to fast forward just a little bit to our current national context, I want to talk a little bit about that rollback. And we know that anti-DEI and anti-critical race theory movements are very much a part of this backlash that we are experiencing now. But historically, that's been the result of the introduction of Black curricula into mainstream educational systems. And the ways, so some of the places that we've seen this as of late, we know that states like Florida and Texas and Tennessee really have done a lot to limit discussions about race, systemic racism, the history of racial oppression in this country. And we also know that there's a series of laws now that ban critical race theory from education. And I'm sure like the lawyers on the call are, I know that I always think twice about that, because I was introduced to critical race theory in law school, and what many of these folks are referring to as critical race theory is simply American history. But most of those laws are grounded in restriction or the banning of critical race theory, and seek to limit any content that would make a white student feel uncomfortable about racial issues. And as a result of this, it's led to a removal of a lot of curricula that address Black history, or even like the alteration. Could you go to the next slide for me, please? Thank you. And so, what we've done as a result of this in this country is reduce most of these discussions to very basic discussions about civil rights or about slavery. And, if you take a look at the slides here, the image to the right kind of represents what we've seen across the country, a groundswell of communities, white communities, who have taken issue with Black curricula in schools, public, private, and otherwise. And then what you see on the left here is an actual excerpt from a textbook. And this particular textbook is, this is how this textbook explains slavery to students. And it's the Atlantic slave trade between the 1500s and 1800s brought millions of workers from Africa to the southern United States to work on agricultural plantations. And so this is one textbook of many that have really kind of watered down not only that experience, but other experiences that point to some type of issue with slavery or anti-Black sentiment. And we've seen, of course, I think Khalil just mentioned Florida. I think many of us will recall the removal of Black history or African American studies from the College Board's AP repertoire of courses. And, Florida officials are arguing that it promotes a political agenda as opposed to teaching about a particular group. But, these actions have created an educational environment where discussions about race are extremely sanitized, just the way they are in this slide, or completely eliminated from curricula. And, you know, what that actually has an impact, which I think is really the question here. You know, what is the impact on Black students and Black communities when we have Black curricula diminished or erased from schools? Well, first and foremost, Black students often lack accurate and full representation in their education, right? Which kind of leads to a sense of exclusion. So, you know, we aren't represented in the curricula, and so it leaves many Black students wondering, you know, where they fit in to this American landscape, particularly as it relates to history, but in other areas as well. And the literature tells us that, you know, that exclusion from those narratives has a negative impact on Black students and really all students. And so we're talking about mental health, self-esteem, certainly a sense of belonging. But in addition to the impact that it has on Black students, it really does have an impact on all students. It deprives all students of having a complete understanding of American history, and that affects their ability to engage critically with current social issues. So think about if students don't have information about what has transpired historically. We know that there's this marginalization of Black people that continues to happen in our society. These students that are being educated, if they don't have that exposure, really do not possess the skills to, to deal with that. And so, you know, that marginalization really does erase the contributions of Black people in our history, and it limits our ability to have discussions about the contemporary challenges like the ones we're dealing with right now, like mass incarceration, police violence, economic disparities, and all of the things that are to come. And so without having that context, that historical context, it really puts all of our students, not just Black students, at a disadvantage. And finally, I'll just say here, you know, it creates these restrictions around conversations. These anti-Black policies perpetuate cycles of ignorance and misinformation. And so it just makes it incredibly difficult to address issues like reparations in a systemic and meaningful way. And so in conclusion, I think that addressing these challenges really does require more than just mandating curricular changes, even though that is certainly the start. Some teachers are, I think, well, I'll just say some of these solutions that we have to this include supporting teachers in providing adequate resources for all students if they, you know, to learn about this history, and fostering environments where these open and honest conversations and inclusive conversations can take place. The Amistad Law here in New Jersey is certainly a positive step in that direction, but we know that every state doesn't have an Amistad Law. And there really needs to be a broader national effort to address this particular challenge, especially in light of what we're dealing with right now. And so ensuring that anti-Black practices don't continue to wreak havoc on our educational systems are going to require persistent efforts to uphold comprehensive and inclusive Black history education. And I know that my colleagues, many of them, will talk a little bit more about what that looks like in the state of New Jersey and what that history has looked like. And so I think that's all I'll say about this. But before I turn things back over to Khalil, it does give me great pleasure to introduce a friend and colleague, Mr. Tyreek Roland, who will be performing a piece for us this evening. And I have a little bio here. So Tyreek currently serves as the director of the Department of Public Works in Newark, New Jersey. Previously, Tyreek was an academic counselor for the NJ STEP program at Rutgers University. which provides incarcerated students and students impacted by the justice system with a college education and reentry service. And that is the context in which I know and have worked with Tariq. He serves as a mentor, a social justice activist, and a motivational speaker, and is an honors graduate of Rutgers University, Newark, having earned a BA in social work along with a minor in social justice. And he's currently pursuing a master's in public administration from Rutgers, Newark as well. He's the co-founder of Standing for Change, which provides mentoring, tutoring, and motivational speaking services for inner city youth. He also serves as the Honors Living and Learning Community Scholar alumni, as an Honors Living Learning Community Scholar alumni, and overcoming the school to prison pipeline himself. Tariq knows all about the psychological and emotional impact that incarceration inflicts on individuals. And he now uses his mighty platform to speak for those who are voiceless. Please join me in welcoming Tariq Roland, and I'm going to turn it over to you, Tariq.
Thank you, Provost Tyson. I appreciate it. Good evening, everyone. First, I would like to thank the council for allowing me to speak and do a spoken word piece. I wrote this piece in my transition when I was exiting out the halfway house and was a part of the Honors Living Learning community at Rutgers, Newark. So it's called Give Us What You Owe. I'll just jump right into it. Rest in peace, Oogie. And if I am supposed to be innocent before proven guilty, then why would I have a bail? The law requires me to be judged by a jury of my own peers, but sitting from this defense stand makes it hard to tell. Because 9 out of 12 won't look like we. And well, for the other 3, just hearing the charges will make it hard for them to see the human in me. But what really burns me up is that whenever an expert is about to take the stand and testify, they tend to lie. See, rather than tell the truth that would expose their bogus investigation and reveal all our rights they violated, they are trained to say, I do not recall. I have the right to meet my accuser and challenge that the evidence was fruit from a poisonous tree. But Judge Megan made that confidential informant inadmissible, and I'm sitting back in my seat thinking, damn, how could this be? Shackled in chains, living in fear and mental bondage, they did our ancestors the same. In the 1500s, they named the slave ship Jesus, told our people the Messiah was coming, held them captive and made them slaves. In the 1500s, they named the slave ship Jesus, told our people the Messiah was coming, held them captive and made them slaves. And master playing pastor behind a pulpit using the Bible to keep us in order. I guess that's why I'm struggling to believe that Christ really walked on water. When great-great-grandma been working them fields, making your family meals and still can't rub together 2 quarters. Please just give us what you owe and let my people go. Because first you lied about 40 acres and a mule, and then once you seen black progress, you destroyed the Freedmen's Bureau. But the way you disguised it was crafty and not surprising. I guess this is why you refuse to admit that America's independence was won in a riot. Land of the free and home of the brave, you're still lying. Your success was built on violence. The master of separation, and how you used trickery to make us believe the civil rights movement was about us only wanting reintegration. When all we ever wanted was equal and equitable opportunity. See how easily we forget 1956, the implementation of COINTELPRO. This was a time when many races decided to reunite, and together we would stand and fight against all inequalities. But as you fast forward today, we protesting just to raise minimum wage. I mean, don't we all deserve adequate pay? Quality of life with a decent living? But now my people so broken, we can care less for voting. See, that's what happens when you don't give us a pot to piss in. I said, now our people are so broken, we can care less for voting. See, that's what happens when you don't give us a pot to piss in. I'm struggling, I'm conflicted. Because Martin said, turn the other cheek, and I'm damn sure not doing that. Malcolm said, nah, for an eye, I'd rather join that team. But I'll continue to walk in victory as a proud Black king. After all, I am my ancestors' wildest dreams. Thank you so much. Appreciate you, everyone. Thank you, Council, for having me.
Thank you very, very much, Tariq Roland. That was very powerful performance and very appropriate for all the issues that are the legacy effects and the ongoing relationship of oppression, state violence, and the quest for liberty. I want to just also acknowledge something that Kenya said about the distortions of the erasures of Black history going on right now. And I'm reminded of the consequences of that. Baldwin famously wrote about innocence of white people was the core crime when it came to what was happening to Black people. In his opening essay, Fire Next Time, he literally says innocence is the crime. And elsewhere, he talked about the fact that that innocence led to a state or a condition of being a moral monster. And it feels not just prophetic in terms of Baldwin's voice in this moment, but when we see the way in which the federal government has become the plaything of moral monsters who are hell-bent on ensuring that the rest of the nation is as innocent and ignorant of its own history, we can see the stakes playing out right before our eyes. So thank you very much, Kenya, for that incredible presentation. I want to now ask the audience to complete a very quick poll. We'd love to know who's here, and by the count, at least in the Zoom, we have about 100 folks. So the slide will prompt you to complete a poll, and it should be a very quick one. So we'll take about a minute, and I think someone's going to start the poll now. I don't see the poll happening. Is it happening? There it is. Okay. Looks like we have about 75 participation, and of course there are a number of members of the task force here, so we're just about there. Going once, going twice. Okay, so I'm going to end the poll, and we should be able to share the results. So looks like we have a very small number of people who identify as students. So hopefully for any future version of the Reparation Council Task Force, if you are an educator, as 27% of you are, you might encourage some of your students to participate and be part of this. That's really important. 10% community organizers, 32% from the nonprofit community-based sector, no elected officials, and maybe Amber is our only philanthropic supporter tonight, and then a number of people who are doing something or who are represented by something not presented in the poll. So just to say thank you very much. We can't do this work, and we certainly can't go forward without you. At this time, I would like to introduce our fourth presenter, Dr. Tim Eatman, who is going to discuss the impact of segregation on New Jersey schools, as well as another look at the impact on school curriculum here in the state, as well as the Amistad legislation, which Kenya talked about a moment ago.
Thank you so much, Dr. Muhammad. It's quite a delight to come alongside my colleagues to be a part of this important conversation and the important work of the New Jersey Reparations Council. Contrary to some populist narratives, segregation logics and tactics are present in the educational enterprise of the United States. In northern states such as New Jersey, masked racially divisive tactics to produce segregative outcomes in contrast to the overtly discriminative and abhorrent Jim Crow laws of the South. In the Oxford Handbook of U.S. education law, the inimitable legal scholar and civil rights attorney, Elise Boddy, who has advanced much publicly engaged scholarship about school segregation in New Jersey, denounces the distinction between de facto and de jure segregation, arguing that the distinction really serves only to relieve government officials from remedial responsibility. Courts requiring a specific showing of discriminatory intent for equal protection claims has resulted in lasting segregative effects in states such as New Jersey. De jure segregation in New Jersey is anything but accidental and has resulted in racially isolated districts and recessive repercussions for Black public education. Residential segregation has produced lower expectations for Black students, overcrowding classrooms, substandard education materials, all effects contributing to the lack of Black mobility and progress. Additionally, because more schools were initially built in white communities, when funding was available, schools in Black and Latino concentrated districts are larger and enjoy less abundant resources. These outcomes erroneously communicate to Black students, as been mentioned by several of my colleagues, that they are inferior, unworthy, and ousted from opportunities to grow and excel in society. Limiting access to quality education perpetuates disparities between communities of color and their white counterparts. These students are then confined to low-income neighborhoods with disproportionately invested public schools. Since the civil rights movement, integration remains elusive as equitable allocation in funding, merging district lines, and accountability for responsible parties who have failed to remedy disproportionalities remains. Low-income districts in New Jersey suffer from poor academic achievement as Black students are consistently falling behind in reading and college readiness tests. Hyper-segregated districts such as Newark, Camden, Jersey City, and Trenton are classified as special needs districts. In these areas, curriculum is less challenging, teachers are less prepared, and a lack of supplemental funding to compensate for overpopulation has led to a scarcity of resources. Authority in education funding and autonomy over school policies lie within the state and local districts rather than federal control, since the Reagan administration cut many legislative education imperatives. I just want to point to the fact that there has been pushback from parents, as the example of the Jenkins versus Morris School District Board of Education. Black parents demanded the Commissioner of Education to address the disparity between neighboring communities that shared most utilities, but had separate school districts. Of these two communities, the districts were racially unbalanced, with Morris Township having almost 65% Black students. The case went up to the Court of Appeals, where they found a discriminatory purpose, and the Commissioner of Education was ordered to act. On the other hand, Englewood County, New Jersey, experienced similar racial divides in their school districts, but the Supreme Court of New Jersey found a lack of intentional discriminatory findings despite Black students at predominantly Black schools testing 2 years behind their white counterparts. These drastic disparities can be seen in part as resulting from lack of cultural competence and understanding between Black students and educators in their communities. Parents organized sit-ins and demanded justice, but were faced with backlash from political leaders. I want to lift up quickly just an important report by the Cornwell Center for Metropolitan Studies at Rutgers University, Newark, where Charles Payne and his colleagues in 2023 talked about segregating schooling in New Jersey, the distribution of opportunities to learn by race, ethnicity, and class. And this report, which drew primarily on data from the New Jersey Department of Education's school performance reports, looks specifically at segregated school environments, and the Cornwall framework, organized a five sort of types of segregated schools, and I'll just name them quickly. One is mixed enrollment schools. The second is white isolated schools. The third is economically segregated. The fourth is racially segregated schools, and the fifth is racially and economically segregated schools. Also being shown on the slide now is a chart from the Love is the Foundation for Life SHOT report from the SHOT Foundation on Black Males in Public Education from 2024. And this displays residential segregation within the 15 selected school districts. The neighborhood dissimilarity index is an indicator of Black-white residential dissimilarity within census tract among each city. The index ranges from 0 to 100, with 0 indicating perfect integration. All of the 15 selected school districts had relatively high levels of residential segregation. In fact, other than Minneapolis, over half of the Black people in each area would have to move for there to be residential integration across census tracts. Next slide, please. Yes, that was good. You can go back. Yeah. Yes. Well, the one before that, but there's a growing body of evidence to suggest that culturally relevant approaches in education improve various student outcomes, such as engagement, academic performance, and motivation. The Department of Education data reveals that as of 2024, of all the student groups, Black students were furthest from their proficiency rate annual target, meeting just about half of the expected goal. Given the concentrated population of Black students in predominantly quote unquote minorities public schools and what the research evidence suggests about achievement, the approaches to curriculum should be culturally responsive. And there's a great body of research on that. I just want to point out that a New Jersey Spotlight News report from December 2024 indicates that Newark, the state's largest school district in Newark, 25.7% of fourth grade students met or exceeded expectations, 25.7 in English, language, and arts, and 19.9 met or exceeded expectations in math. In the wealthier Colts Neck Township School District, 83% of students met or exceeded expectations in English, language, arts, and 78.2% did so in math. Striking difference. We can go to the next slide. So New Jersey was the first state to legislate a focus on Black history in their signing of the Amistad legislation. Councilor Tyson made reference to it a bit earlier. Amistad mandates the inclusion of Black history in public education curricula, such as African slave trade, slavery in America, and the contributions of Black Americans in the state's history. Amistad is a fitting name for this commission as it evokes the powerful case from February of 1839, where Portuguese slave hunters abducted a large group of Africans from Sierra Leone and shipped them to Havana, Cuba, a center for the slave trade. This abduction violated all of the treaties that were then in existence, and two Spanish plantation owners purchased 53 Africans and put them aboard the Cuban Amistad ship and sent them to Caribbean to send them to a Caribbean plantation. And this legislation, this case went up to the Supreme Court, and many of you know that it was argued by John Quincy Adams. Supreme Court ultimately decided in favor of the Africans, stating that they were free individuals. They were kidnapped and transported illegally. They had never been slaves. And the court ordered the immediate release of the Amistad Africans. It is a case, that displays the importance of agency and resistance, law and narrative, even in an uncouth environment. And so this legislation that is connected to that to give us a greater opportunity for young people of African descent and all young people to experience Black history in a healthy way is really quite important. And it's been over 20 years since that Amistad legislation was signed in New Jersey. But research shows that because the bill lacks oversight and direction, it has minimal impact at best. Curriculum instruction is largely based on teacher preference and direction, therefore without proper guidance. And the impact of the Amistad legislation is far-reaching, but we won't go into that right now. I'm going to hasten to an end and ask you to go to the next slide. In 1998, my wife and I took our daughter to actually see the movie Amistad. And I'm embarrassed to say that even in the very conscious home that I grew up in, I didn't know about the importance of that case, where Cinque is known to be imploring for his and his comrades' freedom by saying, "Give us free, give us free." And we took our 2-year-old daughter to the movie, and as we were leaving the theater, she kept repeating, "Give me free, give me free." And we were amazed that she was doing that. Perhaps we shouldn't have taken her, but we did. But I think that this chorus, "Give us free," reverberates among our communities now. And not only among adults, but among children. I'll go to the next slide. New Jersey Institute for Social Justice is supporting, next slide, please. Yes, the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice is supporting a Voter 16 initiative. Here pictured is one of our Honors of Learning community scholars, Nathan Duguid, who's a Newarker, who has got a lot of fire behind this effort that is designed to help young people become directly involved in that which matters so much to them in terms of the school board policies. And so as we look at this issue of segregation, if we look at this issue of the curriculum, the culturally responsive curriculum that's needed, and we look at the legislation that has been before us, we know that there's much for us to accomplish still in this effort to give us free. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Eatman. I think that we saw yet again how powerful the narrative of the past is in shaping the society that we live in. And you had a moment there when you described for your daughter that you weren't sure in her refrain of "give us free," that you made the right decision. And I just want to say you did, absolutely, because these histories are difficult to encounter no matter at what age. And like any subject that one must master, you have to encounter this lesson early and often so that you can essentially overcome the shock and awe of it all in the beginning. And that's precisely why it's been so easy to motivate organizations like the Moms for Liberty, who out of their own more than likely whitewashed histories are shocked by the content of the 1619 Project. How could this possibly be? How can I be an adult? This must be part of a Marxist takeover of this country. So I really appreciate you bringing that story of the importance of Amistad, both as a cultural moment, as also a way of historical reckoning, and of course, the state of New Jersey being early to an adoption of such a recommendation, although there's still work to do in terms of getting it taught in classes across the state. And then finally, to anchor us in the world of segregation that we still have with us, and the notion that we live in a society where every child has an equal opportunity to get the best education. It simply isn't true. And this state, like every other state in this country, still struggles with that policy. So New Jersey in some ways has more legal firepower to deal with it than some other states. And we hope that this reparations task force will be part of pressing for the change that is necessary. Thank you very much. At this time, we're going to move on. We've got 2 more speakers, so please bear with us as we move towards public session. We really want to hear from you, and so stick around. We'll be on this session. We'll be at this session until 9 o'clock, but we'll get you to public session soon. At this time, I'd like to bring Dion to the conversation. And so Dion, you've been looking at the history of reparation efforts in the state and how they've been understood or received by residents. So what have you found?
Hi, Khalil. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here. And thank you so much for that question. It was really exciting for me to delve into this as someone who's lived in New Jersey most of my life. So what I found is that Black Americans have advocated for reparations since encountering this land, and that includes Africans forcibly brought to New Jersey. One of the earliest known freedom suits on record happened in 1644 when 11 enslaved Black men petitioned the Council for New Netherland, which is present-day New Jersey and Manhattan, for their freedom. And they were granted land, but as tenants of the West India Company, so a kind of a half freedom. Petitions for freedom continued under English rule and then in independence when New Jersey became a state. However, self-liberation among enslaved people in New Jersey was not only sought through the judiciary. Black people resisted their bondage through insurrections and by running away. In the 1700s, New Jersey had the second highest number of slaves of any colony north of Maryland. New York was first. There were slave insurrections in Somerville, Hackensack, Perth Amboy, and Elizabethtown, which we all now know as Elizabeth. After a major slave rebellion in New York City in 1741, fears of a similar incident in Elizabethtown led to at least 3 slaves in that town being burned at the stake. Once free, Black people memorialized their accounts in order to continue to support abolition, as well as for their own personal, spiritual, and psychic repair. And one example of that is Burlington County resident Hannah Craft, who wrote the novel Bondswoman's Narrative about a woman enslaved in the South escaping to freedom in New Jersey. This fictionalized autobiography, written in the 1850s, is thought to be the first novel written by an African-American woman and the only known novel written by a fugitive slave. Once slavery was abolished, it was slave owners, not the formerly enslaved, who received reparations. New Jersey's 1804 Gradual Abolition Act included a clause that compensated enslavers who let their bonded people go free. Can you show the first slide, please? After gradual abolition, Black New Jerseyans continued to fight for total abolition throughout the country by joining the Union in the Civil War and helping enslaved people escape to freedom. The pictured graves of Black Union soldiers are located in Timbuktu, a village in Burlington County, incorporated by formerly enslaved and free Black people. It was also a stop on the Underground Railroad. New Jersey was an integral part of the Underground Railroad and is connected to its 2 most celebrated figures. Harriet Tubman spent several summers as a hotel worker in Cape May, earning money to finance her liberation missions. And native New Jerseyan William Still was both the most important Underground Railroad operative in Philadelphia and the author of the classic, The Underground Railroad. Can you go to slide 2, please? To strengthen their communities and repair the wreckage of slavery and freedom, Black New Jerseyans organized everything from fraternal lodges and benevolent societies to churches and schools. The first statewide Black convention was held at Trenton's Mount Zion African Methodist Episcopal Church in 1849 to advocate for Black men's right to vote. And on March 31st, 1870, one day after the ratification of the 15th Amendment, which allowed him the right to vote, Thomas Mundy Peterson of Perth Amboy became the first African-American to cast a ballot in an election. The earliest churches were AME, but by the turn of the 20th century, Noble Drew Ali founded what he would later name the Moorish Science Temple in Newark, a precursor to the Nation of Islam, which advocates for reparations. Churches often met the educational needs of the Black community, like the AME Zion Church of Newark, but private citizens also filled this void, as in the case of the Colored School in Newark, which was formed in 1828. According to the book Afro-Americans in New Jersey, even the Reconstruction South had free education before New Jersey. So New Jersey was the last of the states to give its children free education. Can you go to the next slide, please? At the beginning of the civil rights movement, New Jerseyan Paul Robeson led a coalition to the United Nations to present that body with a petition by the Civil Rights Congress titled, "We Charge Genocide, the Crime of Government Against the Negro People." Citing the UN's definition of genocide, the petition documented hundreds of lynching cases. Robeson's Civil Rights Congress colleague, William Patterson, presented the same petition to the UN that was meeting in Paris. As Black Power swept the country in the 1960s, Newark native and state poet laureate Amiri Baraka joined the Republic of New Africa, along with reparations advocate Mother Audley Moore, on the idea that a self-governed Black nation should be created out of 5 Southern states, and the group also sought reparations of $4 billion. Individual New Jerseyans also executed creative reparations projects like East Orange architect Edward Bowser Jr., one of the first Black architects in the state, who designed the Kazuri-Kijiji housing development in the 1970s, cited in an article by Jet Magazine as the largest housing development in the United States developed by Black people. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. In the absence of federal or state reparations legislation or mandates, New Jerseyans have continued to take reparative actions into their own hands. Municipalities have memorialized their history of slavery and racial violence with commissions like Shadow of a Face in Newark and a plaque memorializing a lynching in Eatontown. The town of Elizabeth will also memorialize the enslaved executed there in the 1700s that you heard me reference earlier. Organizations like the William Trent House Museum, which you heard about earlier, Friends of the Howe House, Sankofa Collective, William Still House, and the Stoutsburg Sauerland African American Museum, just to name a few, have told the fuller story of slavery to the public, as have institutions like Princeton University and Rutgers. Princeton Theological Seminary announced a $27 million commitment for various initiatives to recognize how it benefited from Black slavery. And there have also been legislative efforts. In the early 2000s, then Essex County Assemblyman Craig Stanley introduced the Racial Reconciliation Act, which would have established a 29-person commission to study New Jersey's role in supporting slavery and discrimination against freed enslaved Africans and their descendants. But the bill never progressed. Then in 2019, Senator Shavonda Sumter revitalized Stanley's bill, but it also has stalled. So perhaps the most important stride towards reparations in our state is the Amistad Commission, which you heard spoken about. This legislation passed in 2002 broadly aims to address the historical and continued oppression of Black Americans through a state mandate that requires inclusion of African American history in New Jersey's public schools. I grew up just a few miles from Timbuktu, yet I never knew about this important piece of history until I was an adult, independently researching and writing for my own, purposes. So in theory, the Amistad Commission would address these kind of disconnects, but the mandate, as you heard before, only sets an intention. It doesn't outline a teaching method or demand any outcomes. So where we are is that the state's reparation bills are stalled. Our governor won't say the word reparations. And while we have a mandate to teach the history of slavery in our schools, the legislation itself has no teeth. To date, 18 municipalities have passed proclamations in support of the state bills A938 and S386 that would create a task force to study reparations for slavery in New Jersey. But widespread support for the Black Lives Matter movement, cited as the most successful and biggest movement of all times, has not necessarily translated into widespread support for reparations. Can you go to the final slide, please? So I'll just leave you with this slide from Pew Research Center's study. This 2021 Pew Research Center study found that survey, I should say, found that 70% of those surveyed were opposed to the descendants of the enslaved receiving reparation payments. When broken down along racial lines, 77% of Black respondents said the descendants of people enslaved in the US should be repaid in some way versus 18% of white respondents. And so our next step is to learn what people in New Jersey think and what they know and why. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much, Dion. I thought a lot about the long history and durée of reparation struggles from Mount Zion AME to Shavonda Sumter's building on an earlier racial reparations or reconciliation. I guess it was called Racial Reconciliation Act and not a Reparations Act. And then to also lift up the ways in which so-called reparative actions have taken place in the state, going back to the establishment of various archives, including more recently the work of the William Still House or the Harriet Tubman Museum, which is trying to tell the story of Harriet Tubman's many return to Maryland to free enslaved people, crossing the Delaware Bay to Cape May, which most everyone here knows is very much the South by geography and in many ways by culture for much of its history. And so I just want to thank you for giving us that grounding in both the local and the national and the long durée. I also wanted to say we all to be inspired and constantly reminded that Paul Robeson was a New Jerseyan. What a towering figure for the kind of courage that we need to see in our own moment and the sacrifice on behalf of everyone, and particularly for those who are most vulnerable in this society. So thank you so much, Dion. And at this time, we'll move to Dreesen, who is amongst the many wonderful contributors to this committee and has a breadth of experience in this work, as I mentioned at the top. And so, Dreesen, talk a little bit about reparative frameworks and where we can look to inspiration for reparative models as it relates to New Jersey's remedies, its past and current public education and narrative harms. And what do you think, given your breadth of experience, what do you think is possible?
Thank you so much, Khalil, and thank you to my colleagues. It is great to be a part of this all-star team in this effort to bring full reparations to New Jersey. In our committee and across the council, we're hoping to present some of the most transformative policies and initiatives, even in the face of resistance, of white backlash, of societal regression. And we've seen ways, even at the highest levels of government, and my colleagues have already spoken to the efforts to seek and distort the truth, as well as, instead of promoting repair, promoting own personal grievances to distract the call for reparations. And we know that these exclusion of lived experiences of Black people in particular are tools of white supremacy. And we know that the omission of Black history and Black life is no accident. And so the intentional efforts by community that Dion just talked about to make sure that when you walk the streets of New Jersey, that you feel the Black experience, that you know the Black experience, is incredibly important. And not only is our work needed to be grounded in what's possible, it's also in reinvigorating the worthiness back into African-American and Black communities that should not be ashamed or scared into thinking that their claims to reparations should not be acknowledged. And so we know there's a long-standing legal right to remedy and reparation. If you could go to the next slide, please, which highlights, a routine practice of reparation across the globe, but also nationally and locally. And within this framing, particularly in the United Nations framing, which I will say there were petitions for reparations, as we just heard, in the 1600s, in the 1700s. And so when we're discussing even the UN framework, knowing that that is a modern framework, and our people were self-liberating themselves and demanding what was owed to them prior to these existing frameworks. But when thinking about restitution, you're thinking about the return of property, the return of employment, the return of education, as we've been describing today. We're thinking about compensation as a response to disinvested or intentionally under-resourced education and segregation efforts. We're thinking about rehabilitation, trauma-informed care as it relates to the impacts of teaching these living legacies for people who are directly impacted. We're thinking about satisfaction measures. We've heard about the public markers, about the public memory efforts that are going on across the state. And those are incredibly important, including those which highlight particular official apologies by the state or by a private entity or business that has committed harm. And so with just a brief overview of those measures, in addition to the guarantees of non-repetition, which is just a wonky way to say, a way to cease the harm. How do we end these harms from occurring again? With that in mind, knowing that reparations must be direct and meaningful and proportional, we are looking at other jurisdictions across the country in locales that could inspire New Jersey's response to reparations for public education and narrative, our committee's mandate. If you would give me the next slide, please. And you also may ask, why now? Why now in this particular moment are we asking for full and comprehensive reparations? And as Dion just mentioned, again, there were petitions for freedom in New Netherlands. In the prior iteration of this state, people were self-liberating and performing insurrections to free themselves. But also we have example, even in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, another, northern state with deep roots in slavery and in the transatlantic slave trade industry, where Belinda Sutton, one of the more recognized models of reparations, petitioned for her reparations prior to the abolition of slavery. And so if they can do so in those conditions, we can do so now. Next slide, please. So when you look at Chicago, for instance, the city of Chicago, even prior to Evanston, Illinois, passing its reparative housing program, Chicago issued a comprehensive reparations package to victims of police torture that were experienced in the 80s and 70s and 80s. And within that package, in addition to financial compensation, trauma-informed care, and other benefits, there was a Reparations 1 curriculum that was developed, the 8th and 10th grade curriculum that doesn't just recall the violence of the police torture ring, but also includes the learnings on why reparations were necessary in this case. In addition, torture survivors, as well as their families, have access to free education and full tuition to the city's colleges because they were stripped and disenfranchised of their right to education while they endured torture. And then the recognition that the effects of torture extend just beyond the individual to the family was an incredible recognition. Next slide, please. Other curriculum models include teaching units on designing a reparations bill, to supplement existing legislation such as HR 40, which is the Commission to Study and Develop Reparations Proposals for African Americans Act, introduced in the federal government for over 35 years now. I would encourage you to take a look at the press conference actually today around the reintroduction by Representative Ayanna Pressley, the new sponsor of the bill. But having this opportunity to take curriculum and use it as a way to further develop what contemporary harms need to be investigated and what reparations should look like. So almost with the lived experience that we do have, taking HR 40 and making it real. On the left-hand side, you have the recommendations that came out of the first of its nation state California task force and their recommendations around educator-related remedies. So I implore you to look at chapter 23 of their report. Although I would argue that some of these recommendations conflate what government should already be invested in, such as access to public schools, or additional recommendations. And so it is also our challenge not to conflate what is ordinary public policy with what is the intentionality behind reparative justice. Next slide, please. In terms of media reckonings, which are also a form of reparations, I would love to shout out an organization called Media 2070, which is actively and collectively dreaming about reparative policies, interventions, and futures and media reparations. And they tackle responses exactly to what's displayed here, where news organizations like The Guardian, the LA Times, the Hartford Courant, Montgomery Advisor have sought to publicly acknowledge and commit to some type of reparative action. This can be applied to New Jersey as well for local New Jersey outlets. Mark mentioned earlier various newspapers that ran, quote unquote, runaway slave ads. And although most of those newspapers are out of production, some of them have transferred into new life. And still, owners and stewards of those and the descendants of those outlets may still engage in reparative action. Next slide, please. You've also heard the discussion of educational loss, of under-resourcing, of schools that service Black students. In response to that, you have full scholarship programs that have been developed in response to race massacres in Rosewood, Florida, as well as Tulsa, Oklahoma. What is also not pictured here is the Ocoee, Florida Race Massacre Descendant Scholarship, which that funding was actually renewed under Governor Ron DeSantis. And so even when there's an agenda to push back on these things are happening, regardless of leadership at times, although there is also pushback at times, but we need to celebrate the wins under whatever political regimes. When thinking about actually compensating, which I know some of our other committees are thinking about as well, it's so important to ensure that we are thinking about perpetual resources for Black students and ways to restore that right to education. Next slide, please. And so I'm always moved by the stumbling stones that can be found all throughout Europe. It is, as I've titled, unavoidable public memory. imagine, walking down a street and literally taking a stumble because of raised stones, and you have to acknowledge and realize what you have just stepped on or stepped over. And while they, may be community-led efforts at this point, these were efforts that were also seeded, by government funding. So I'm even thinking of, if there were stumbling stones in New Jersey, just imagine, walking to the Prudential Center, the millions of people that come out of that building day by day, and the significance of that. Next slide, please. So in 2008, New Jersey did apologize for slavery. But there was an important clause that was also introduced within the text. And many jurisdictions have taken this stance where they include a clause that the resolution should not be used for the basis of any type of litigation. And so therefore, we are apologizing without any chance that we will be held culpable or accountable legally, morally, socially. But it also resolves that, citizens of the state should remember slavery and continue to encourage people to teach about the history and the legacy of slavery and Jim Crow laws. And so there's still a mandate within this apology to mandate Amistad into a core curriculum. That's what I hear when I read that statement. I hear both mandates for the education system as well as for community members. And so it does not hurt to revisit that apology so that actual remedial material reparations could be administered as a result of the state's apology. Next slide, please. And so to wrap it up, our committee has been thinking about many ways in which to embark on reparations as it relates to public education and narrative. We talked about direct compensation as it relates to harms related to unequal education or harmful anti-Black narratives. We've talked about the return of property of Black significance that may have been taken by eminent domain. We've talked about the mandating of curriculum and what an official apology looks like, what media reckonings look like, what these public permanent markers look like, such as Harriet Tubman Square, which was reorganized and re-sculpted after the previous square was George Washington Square, as well as lynching markers, which again, led by community in partnership with organizations like the Equal Justice Initiative to create these lasting legacies to support the memorialization and documentation of both these crimes, but also the living legacies of the descendants who survived throughout. We've talked about burial grounds, and so wanting to permanently protect those grounds and knowing that the state of New Jersey has within its power and has practiced those type of preservation efforts prior to. So our council, next slide, please. Our council will continue to solicit and encourage community thoughts and dreams into this process. We are certainly entering into another level of hostility. We are living through it now, and I'm sure it will tick up a few notches. But reparations are possible, are feasible, are constitutional. And the demand for just living conditions and a just society we are owed should continue to live on. And so as Intelligent Mischief and Aisha Shillingford asked us, what if we regrounded, reclaimed, and recovered ourselves in this process as well? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jason. you gave us a lot of frameworks and some concrete examples of the kinds of ways that people have put in the world reparative and redistributed efforts. And as a native Chicagoan, I often think a lot about the first and only effort to deliver reparations to victims of police torture. And the curriculum inclusion is such a powerful model for the relationship of both the cessation of harm, the compensation of that harm, and the commitment to learn from that history in ways that it can never be or should never be repeated. So I hope that many of the folks here saw that what this council is pushing for exists already in the world. And that the only thing that stands in the way of us doing it is a commitment to move forward. At this time, we are going to open up for public session, and I'm going to hand it to Jean-Pierre to walk us through how this works.
Thank you so much, Khalil, and I really appreciate your sort of deft and highly skilled and subtle job of moderating and linking the past, the present, and also I really want to thank our Public Education Narrative Committee for the wonderful job and for all the knowledge that they provided us over these past 2 hours. And so I really appreciate you all. Thank you so much for your time, for your knowledge, your expertise. And now we want to open up to you all. And before we do that, I do want to just touch on really 3 items. I want to just talk a little bit about the current moment, as others have, give you a little bit about the public comment portion, and then I want to thank the team at Just Strategies for all their hard work. So, as many folks have noted, and as many of you are well aware, we are in a new moment, but really more aptly, it's a crisis, right? With troubling echoes of the past, marking a difficult and treacherous time ahead for multiracial democracy, racial justice, and reparations. This is an inflection point characterized by the combination of immigrants, evisceration of affirmative action in higher education, the gutting of voting rights, unvarnished hostility towards DEI, critical race theory, and glaring silence around the significance of racial justice towards multiracial democracy. This critical moment has scrambled and rearranged durable axioms previously considered intractable. Since Reconstruction, the federal government has generally served as a protector of civil rights for Black people, counterposed to the notorious invocation of quote-unquote states' rights, a barely veiled enunciation of white supremacy, Jim Crow, and inherent woke democracy. In a rather ironic role reversal, this moment was ushered in by a Supreme Court skeptical of institutional anti-Black racism, coupled with a presidential administration with its sights set on imploding multiracial democracy via attacks on the law, ideas, and institutions, and people working to build it. The courage to stand up, speak out, and advocate in support of the matters of Black lives, racial and social justice, multiracial democracy, and reparations is now in the hands of advocates working at the state and local level. Thus, it is imperative at this moment that the work of reparations be moved forward by the Institute and at the state level, and our partners working at the state and local level who can provide an example for the rest of the nation. Now, we are going to enter into the public comment portion. As we enter the public comment portion, I really do want to thank the team at Just Strategies who have been working behind the scenes for the past 1.5 years to make these public sessions possible, doing all the back end work. So I want to thank Dwayne Warden and his team at Just Strategies, Stephanie Rhodes, Nyamako Brown, Josh Odom, Jacqueline Conyers Jordan for all their hard work for making this possible. And so thank you so much. And in terms of the public comment, which we'll get into now, I know the committee looks forward to your comments. It's an incredibly important part of this session, and it will inform their work. So thanks to you, for those of you who have already submitted public comments via the website. We appreciate it. And for those of you who would like to submit public comment, you can go to njreparationscouncil.org. Once again, that is njreparationscouncil.org. There are a few rules for the public comment portion. As pointed out in the flyer, those of you who previously registered will be allowed to speak. You'll be limited to 3 minutes. There will be a timer that will be set on the upper right of the Zoom. We will give you a 15-second warning before your time is up. We'll give you a 10-second grace period on the other side of the 3 minutes. If you continue to speak past the grace period, we will mute you. If you're unable to get to all your comments this evening and you previously signed up and you would like more time to express yourself, once again, you can go to njreparationscouncil.org to submit extended commentary. And there you can provide public comment in multiple formats. Finally, this is an incredibly important disclaimer. Hate speech, personal attacks, or threats of any kind will not be tolerated, and you will be promptly removed from this meeting. Prior to passing it over to our co-chairs to moderate the public comment portion, I would like the Just Strategy team to post our poll for you all who are still here, and we want to know, is there anything that you want the committee to think about as they work on their chapter? Right? Is there anything that you think the committee should be thinking about as they finalize their chapter for the June release? So please go ahead and fill out the poll for us. It would be much appreciated. And as you do that, I just want to thank you all for joining this evening. And I'll pass it over to Dreesen and Kenya to moderate our public session portion. And if we do have time, as we go through those who have signed up, and there is still time available, if for those of you who have not signed up or would like to speak, we may provide time for you to provide public comment as well. So please, Dreesen and Kenya.
Thank you. Thank you, Jean-Pierre. I believe we have Jeffrey Rockhill on the line to provide comment?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you. Can you hear
Hi.
me?
Yes, please offer.
All right. Hi, my name's Jeff Rockhill, and I'm the treasurer of a non-for-profit called Friends of the Howe House. You may have seen it during Dion's presentation. Our mission is to protect and uplift the home of James Howe, a formerly enslaved New Jerseyan who achieved freedom in 1817. One of the ways we're doing this is by educating New Jerseyans on the shared knowledge of our shared legacy as a slave state of the North. Despite our flawed origin as a state, sorry, I'm on the wrong camera, I might not apologize. Despite our flawed origins as a state, I think our state has done more to help others than any other state in the country. And I'm a proud 11th generation New Jerseyan whose family story is our history. My Quaker ancestors enslaved African Americans on a plantation in Western Jersey from roughly 1725 to 1825. I first learned about this from a book of historic homes in the area, including one built by my ancestors. Next to a picture of the home, there was a photograph entitled Slave Quarters on the Rock Hill Plantation. Not what I was expecting. Before seeing that picture, I assumed the common narrative about Quakers being abolitionists was the story of my ancestors as well. But my family history, like that of our state, is more complex than that. Looking deeper into the historical record, I saw New Jerseyans whose lives had been erased. People who built communities and built our state. People to whom we owe gratitude, whose lives deserve to be restored to our historical record. People like Bill Black, New Jerseyans like Bill Black. Bill was sold to my fourth great-grandfather at the beginning of 1801 by a tavern owner who needed cash to renew his license. His freedom may have been sold, but not his story. Bill Black and his wife Rachel went on to raise a family. They had 3 daughters, Laura born in the middle of June of 1802, Cynthia the next July, and Maria on a blustery day in January of 1805. The joys of marriage, fatherhood, and family were his. Bill was a vital part of his community. In the summer of 1801, he plastered the walls of the local schoolhouse. In October of that year, he distilled whiskey from the rye that he helped harvest and delivered 4.5 gallons to a neighbor. In the spring of 1802, he spent many of his days plowing on the plantation and on neighboring farms. That fall, after he took part in the harvest, he delivered corn to one neighbor and helped butcher hogs for another. Why do stories like this matter so much so many years later? It's clear that we can't own people, but we can own our past, and we do own the stories that we tell. We can restore the dignity that's been taken from enslaved New Jerseyans like Bill Black, James Howe, and so many others. We can speak of their vitality, intelligence, and fundamental worth, the agency they displayed in living full lives while navigating the
15 seconds.
bondage. We need to expand our history to include all New Jerseyans who were erased, to tell our full story, and to do so honestly and truthfully. Until we do this, we're trapped by our lack of knowledge and our unpaid debts. Thank you for the time.
Thank you so much for that meaningful contribution. I really appreciate that reflection, and our committee appreciates that reflection. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yes. Next, I would love to call on Ingrid Hill, if you're on the line.
Yes, I am. Thank you. First and foremost, thank you for an outstanding and informative presentation. My main concern is always, how do we educate the masses? How do we extend this knowledge base to the masses, helping them to develop strategies to both inform and provide means by which the overall masses can become active participants in accessing information at the various levels of understanding regarding the need for reparations, supporting the passing of the New Jersey Reparations Task Force legislation, and also engaging in the implementation of what is to follow. My concern is that there's always a smaller group of individuals who have an understanding with regards to reparation. The question, in order for us to really move forward as a force, we have to educate the masses. That's all. And that's something for all of us to think about. It's not just the council, but I think every person who's on here tonight to really give it some thought in terms of looking at what kind of strategies we need to develop. Thank you.
Thank you, Ingrid. And that is an important piece for us as a committee, both to elevate these narratives and to sustain the narrative, not just of, Black families and their legacies in New Jersey, but also the narratives around reparations and the necessity for that. So thank you for that charge. And our committee certainly has been thinking about ways to reach the masses and to reach community members where they are.
Up next, could we have Alice Levine? Is Alice on the line?
Yes, I am. Hi, I live in Massachusetts now, but I grew up in Englewood, New Jersey. I lived there I'm 71 years old. I grew up there in the 1960s during an intense desegregation battle in the elementary schools when I myself was in one of the elementary schools. My parents were involved in the struggle for integration, so I thought I knew a lot, but I've learned recently how much I didn't know about the racism that was happening in my own city, as well as throughout Bergen County and New Jersey. And so I've been really focused on that period, and I hope that this committee will, in addition to ensuring that the Amistad Commission, they're charged to make sure that slavery is taught in a real way, including in slavery in New Jersey, also tells the truth about Jim Crow and civil rights in New Jersey, because I've been an educator for many years and I do trainings for teachers. I've focused on finding out, since I grew up in Englewood, New Jersey, where a civil rights battle was happening. And yet when my liberal parents told me about civil rights, and they told me about segregation, they really made that distinction, which I now believe is a false one, between de jure and de facto segregation, as if what I understood as a child is in Englewood, it just happened. Not that there was intentional planning that way. I knew there were prejudiced people in the world, and it was explained to me in that way rather than anything systemic. So I really feel like I'm relearning at age 71 things I never learned, including in the Englewood Public Schools, in spite of the history we had all lived through. The little bit we did learn about civil rights was all about Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks in the South. There this is a book coming out soon on King in the North, which I hope everybody will read. But I've been doing a lot of examination to find every book I can find for kids, teens, and adults about the Northern and Western and Midwestern stories of how Jim Crow played out in our parts of the country, and how rebellions and civil rights struggles happened. I've developed a bibliography which I'm happy to share with the committee if it would be helpful. I'd love to be part. I'm trying to talk to people in the Englewood Library and the Englewood schools, anything I can do as an educator, and I've done a lot with curriculum to help with any
15 seconds.
ideas of how this real history can be taught. I would love to make a contribution. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alice, for your remarks, and we would love to have a copy of your bibliography. So we'll certainly circle back to you to get that information. Thank you very much. And up next, we have Donna Williams. Is Donna Williams on the line?
Yes, I'm here. Hi. So I want to say at first that this was an excellent presentation. Thank you so much for all the information that you have shared with us. And just like the woman that spoke before me, there was a lot of things that I did not know, especially I did not know that New Jersey was the last state to acquiesce to slavery, to releasing slavery. I did not realize that New Jersey was the last state. And that surprised me very much because I really thought of New Jersey as a more progressive state, and that wasn't the case. But that just shows how much I really knew. You don't know what you don't know. So one of the things that I wanted to ask about was the education. With reparation, I want to ask a question. So when we're dealing with reparations and education, I wanted to know if and when, I want to speak more positively, when reparations is achieved for the state of New Jersey, is there a portion of it that will be designated to education, and how is it planned to be used? I've been talking to several educators that I know that are in New Jersey, and they talked about how effective it would be to either deal with the structures, the increasing of education, the how we can bring the disparities of the education for our children, African American children, to children of other cultures, and make it more even. Anybody can answer that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Donna. And we're all constantly learning and relearning. So we right there with you as well. Yes, I mean, the recommendations that we'll be proposing in the forthcoming report certainly are tailored towards the education system in particular. And, that may look like curriculum mandates, as we've talked about earlier today. That might look like, direct compensation for education loss and education-related harms, or the detection of, anti-Black narratives impacting students and teachers. I've seen communities launch, trauma support and resilience funds for teachers. And the thought behind this would be that the reparative responsibility would not be on the people that are impacted and wouldn't be on the community. And so, those resources need to come from the entities and institutions that have perpetuated the harms. So those are ongoing negotiations, and this is the work of the Institute. This is the work of the New Jersey Reparations Council to move policymakers, to move legal, strategies, to move social organizing around how to make this a reality.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you very much for that response. I didn't realize that the schools that caused the harm would have to be held accountable. I thought that there could be more of a not systemic, a statewide thing. But how do you make those distinctions?
Well, that's the thing. You're pointing out a good point around the state has culpability. The state has, committed some harms around education, narrative, public space. And also so have the education systems. Maybe not all of the people in the education system, but the structure of the education system itself. And so you even see some universities in New Jersey thinking about how they're going to reckon with things like displacing Black communities when they have built, into Black communities, or the under-resourcing again of materials and funding for Black students in particular. So I want to say both, and we need both strategies and both methods of attack.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, next up we have Jamin Mason. Jamin Mason.
Yes, ma'am. Can I be heard?
Yes, please.
Oh,
Please
awesome. Yeah. First and foremost, I want to say thank you so much for this very comprehensive, to all y'all, the host, and everyone involved in this. I've been a reparationist for the last 4 years, so I'm very invested, and due to military and service, I've been a New Jerseyan for about 2 weeks. So I definitely plan on getting involved and staying involved until we see this mission through. I believe it's an ancestral mission. I believe the people that are really in the driver's seat at this point truly are here by ancestral design. With that, peace, power, and American Negro reparations to the room, specifically for the descendants of the people group emancipated from United States sanctioned chattel slavery between the years 1863 and 1865. Those ancestral blessings, oh, those ancestral blessings, um, per the land's promise in Special Field Orders 15, January 16th, 1865. I believe that to walk the paths we are supposed to walk. I am here. We have through lineage, marriage records, death records. We trace back so far, and we're trying to get further to 1450. That's right here in South Carolina. That's where my blood comes from. I'm an American born and raised individual. And so all I know is America. All I asking for, which denotes Africa more than America, how would we fit into that equation? That is my first and most prominent.
Hey, Jamin,
Small,
your audio has been cutting in and out. So I'll give you an additional 15, 20 seconds, but you did cut out there for a solid 30 seconds.
oh man. Okay. Can you hear me?
We can hear you now. So yeah,
Okay.
please.
Okay. Yeah. As we all saw, Kendrick Lamar explained very eloquently in the Super Bowl. There are Americans on American soil that come from American Negro bloodline that have been harmed as well? And how do we fit in an African narrative as Americans? In my paperwork, that's all I can show. Again, I do appreciate the knowledge. I appreciate the intent. And I just want to know how true American Negroes fit in that cast. And with that, I'll dock my yacht. Mustard.
Well, thank you so much for your comments. And you did go out for just a moment. I do think that to answer that question, I know that that is a current consideration and debate amongst communities that have been discussing reparations. And as it relates to the work that we're doing, I think that education is so important because, you know, I think that there are many opportunities to really delve into the relationship of Black people here in the United States, Black people and on the continent, and the very complex relationship we have with each other, particularly as it relates to slavery and that period, and even with post-slavery integration and immigration. And so I think that we can use education as a tool to really kind of explore those concepts and figure out what the roles should be of those populations, where the intersections are. And you know, I think that we can also in that process kind of recognize some patterns that not only exist here in the United States and the way that Black people have been treated by this society, and the ways in which the descendants of the people who have treated Black people in America in one way, how their descendants and relatives have colonized other parts of the world. And so I think that's a discussion that certainly is valuable, and one that will lend itself to supporting not only the reparation efforts here in the United States, but the multiple efforts that have emerged across the world, where Black people have said that they are demanding reparations from colonial states. And so, but the way that we get there is opening up curricula and having robust conversations around all of those dynamics. Up next, we have Linda Carter, Esquire. Welcome, Linda. It's great to see you.
Hi, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to put that Esquire stuff up there. I try to be undercover. Anyway,
I told on you.
Anyway, let me go ahead before I get cut off. All right. So, first of all, thank everybody for all the work that you're doing. I've been real impressed. Love history, love the city. I'm in Newark. My concern, I wasn't able to get it on the poll, but I want to say it now. We use the language of our oppressor. It impacts us on how we see the world, how we live daily, the decisions we make, how we behave, how we conduct ourselves, and have done so for a while. But I've lived long enough to know and see where we engage using the language of our oppressor to our benefit without them even knowing what we were talking about using their language. So having said that, is the committee, really looking at the impact of the fact that we use a language that's really against our interests as you are evaluating the work that you've done? I will tell you that I think maybe last week, as a matter of fact, at Hampton University, there was a conference on decolonizing the Black mind. The impact of, it was the second annual second annual Decolonized Black Psychological Conference. This is the second year, which was headed by a Dr. O'Shane Gadsden, who was chair of the Department of Psychology at Hampton University. In light of my question, if you haven't considered the impact of the language we use, which is our oppressive language, and from what I understand, English is a bastardized version of German in the first place, what impact it has on our thoughts and what the final product will come out with. And the other question I have was I'd like to know what you think the impact of the new administration will have on the future of reparations, the reparations movement. Anybody can answer.
Well, you bring up such pertinent points, especially about language, especially about as you have said so eloquently, retooling and using a language that isn't of, even of our ancestral origins. And I think that that is also a core piece of reparations. You have, organizations like in Cobra and others that have organized for decades around restoration of peoplehood, which includes, restoration of spiritual practices and of languages and of tongue. And so we certainly we have, the ability as a committee to tackle, a range of issues within our chapter, and also, get more input to inform how we then produce our chapter and what we directly respond to. And so that's a really important piece. To your second point around the administration, they're here, right? And so HR 40 again was reintroduced, for the 34th time. There will be additional reparations legislation introduced in this first congressional session. I will just, err on the side of caution just when you hear the distorted narratives around, there was a claim that victims of quote unquote DEI would get restitution under this administration. And, those are complete falsehoods to operate under. But there also could be a possibility that the issue of reparations is weaponized amongst this administration. And, there are reparations checks administered by the president because he likes his signature on checks, right? And so that's also the meaningful and intentional part of reparations that we need to understand and we need to educate each other about. We don't know what the various outcomes are going to be, but we should be prepared for anything.
Thank you. Unless someone else has something to say.
I just wanted, hi Linda, good to see you. Hi
Khalil.
I mean, the language question is an interesting one. So the answer is no, it will not be in the report because I think, we should be honest. We've not taken on that question. I think that it's complicated in so many dimensions. So one is that, as you well know, in the African context, there are hundreds of tribes, even within the borders of today's nation states, that are unified in part by their own colonized language. So whether it's British or English or French or Portuguese. But if you've spent any time in these places, I mean, one of the first things you'll recognize is that there might be 10 different languages at play at any given market moment, which is to say that to the earlier question about the uniqueness of African Americans is that there is no way for us to define a particular language that would unify us. If we were to deconstruct our own ancestry, we'd find that our native languages by tribe of Bantu people, which is a very large subset of indigenous people to the continent, would lead us to chaos. It would be the Tower of Babel. And so it's not practical in the context of a report like this to entertain such a notion. I mean, the interesting thing about indigenous histories is that indigenous tribes are much less committed to pan-indigeneity, in which case they are fighting to save their languages, and there's recent reports about AI, but they're talking about very particular tribe with a very particular and unique narrow history that pertains to that particular tribe. So I just thought I'd jump in and say, whereas the question I think is really important, it is not going to be inside of this report. And that doesn't mean that in some future version of this conversation, we can't consider it.
And I was going to direct that question to you anyway, so thank you for answering.
You're welcome.
All right, I have to go watch my old cowboy show. See you guys later. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next, we have Larry Ham. Larry, are you on the line?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. We can hear you now.
Okay. All right. I didn't think I was going to get called. Um, First of all, I want to join with all the previous participants tonight in complimenting um, the task force on education on an excellent presentation. And I want to say, because I don't know if I'm going to get a chance to say this again anywhere, but I really want to commend the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice on the work of putting this council together and on all the work that has been done over the past almost 2 years. Most folks don't know all the work, the hard work that's been done behind the scenes. And I've learned so much from all the learned people on the various task forces. I've learned a lot about this state that I didn't know. But I just wanted to raise a couple of points. And I'm not raising these necessarily for inclusion in the report or anything like that. They're just thoughts that have come to me. I think more light has to be shed on what happened in 1865 after the assassination of Lincoln, because not the passage, because it wasn't a democratic act. General Order 15 was a military edict, and it was essentially by fiat that Sherman issued a military order. He confiscated the slave master's land, I think some 400,000 acres along the southeast coast, and redistributed it to the formerly enslaved, now freedmen and women who worked that land. And then we know that after Lincoln was assassinated, that Johnson issued executive orders to return that land to the former slave masters. One of the questions I have is, what was the disposition of the Republican Party at that time? The Republican Party was the party of the Union. It was the party of Lincoln that prosecuted the war and defeated the Confederacy. Johnson was Lincoln's vice president, but he was from Tennessee. He was a sympathizer. Weren't there enough Republicans in the Congress to, in fact, veto or to override Johnson's veto? That's a question on my mind, and I just think that that's something, and maybe Dr. Muhammad, who has steered this council so well, can direct me to some sources that actually deal with it, because everything I've read is a passing reference. It just says that HR 29, which was based on Field Order 15, did not pass the Congress. I mean, we know Thaddeus Stevens introduced it, but I mean, the question was, why didn't the Republicans fight harder on the reparations question? That was one thing. The other thing is that I think that in the days and months ahead, we really should look at what has happened in California and what is happening in New York. Both California and New York passed reparations commissions, and in California's case, the legislature rejected the most of the bills that the Reparations Commission had introduced. And then lastly, I just wanted to say slavery still exists in New Jersey. It exists in our prisons. And I think we have to give attention to how do we stop forced labor in the state of New Jersey in our prisons.
I'll jump quickly and just address the historical question. So it's a good question, Larry. I appreciate you asking it, and I think it's worth following up on. I'll go back to Eric Foner's recent book, The Second Founding, and see if there's a reference. I give a couple of clues, though. So one, Andrew Johnson's attempt to veto the Civil Rights Bill of 1866, which eventually becomes the 14th Amendment, was overwritten by Congress, which is how we got the Freedmen's Bureau, in which case you're right to ask the question. They clearly overrode Johnson's veto in that instance, so they could have done it in the case of the Sherman Field order in consideration. I will say that the 13th Amendment, to come back to your last point about slavery still exists, was a creature of the same Congress. And in other words, the slavery loophole, the exception as punishment for crime, speaks volumes about the discomfort that the Republican Party had with any kind of property appropriation. Private property, as you well know, is central to capitalism and has been central to this version of liberal democracy. And so, just speculation here, that was a bridge too far. The appropriation of property under the terms of what the field order suggested, and ultimately what would be implied in a massive redistribution in the favor of enslaved people. So that's my best shot at it.
Well, thank you. You know, I would just accept that, and I just think more could have been done, considering the price that was paid to win the Civil War. That nearly 1 million people were killed. It's just hard for me to understand why they did not fight harder. I even heard, now, Dr. Muhammad, you're certainly more knowledgeable than I on this. Maybe you can correct me. I actually had read, not heard, I had read that Frederick Douglass did not take a strong stand on the issue of H.R. 29 and the redistribution of the land, that he felt his efforts were better directed toward getting the amendments passed, 13th, 14th, and 15th amendments passed. But that's what I read, and you know, it's just something that's baffling to me, as why they didn't fight harder, considering the price that was paid to win the Civil War, the numbers of lives that were lost.
Thank you so much for your reflections. We only have a few minutes left, so I'm going to move ahead. But next up will be Michael Loberfeld. Michael Loberfeld, are you here?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you. To me, I think the discussion definitely should be had about reparations, you know, not only for us, but also at state levels or national levels, simply because it's pretty apparent I feel anyway, that there is repairing to be done, at least on some level in some way. When you look at society, there is some repairing and changing to be done. So I think this discussion is a good one to take place, first of all. And I think it's not only about improving the situation of African Americans, but I think when reparations are successful, it will change interactions in society, the interactions of systems, the interactions of structures, the interactions of people. And I personally feel that it would be great if, as part of the solution to repairing and to restructuring and rethinking, if there was a lot of brotherhood and sisterhood and humanhood across races, across cultures, across people of different backgrounds. Because I think that's the best way to do it, is to form partnerships where we're not only fixing or improving conditions and inequalities, but we're also advancing love, advancing hope, advancing peace by us coming together from different backgrounds. I think that would be a great way to do it. And the final thing I wanted to say is, as far as I think it definitely things such as the racial wealth gap in New Jersey and in the country show that there's something not right and something needs to be changed to have such inequality. I also think at the same time that I would think it's not only a matter of reducing inequality or promoting equality or equalness, but also to see the divine nature or the great worth, whether you think of God or just the worth of a human person, whether because of God or just because they're human. I think that is a great reason why that all people, including African Americans, should have the best health, the best opportunity, the best empowerment, because we're special as people, as creations. And so not only a matter of equality, but just
15 seconds.
But also a matter of really seeing the divine nature and how special and precious life is. And therefore we owe it to have the best for everyone, including African Americans. Thank you.
Your comments, Michael. I think we can squeeze in a couple more here. Richley Hutchinson, are you here with us this evening? Ridgely? Okay, we'll move on then. Sydney Asensio. Okay. Tara Williams Harrington. Tariq Rahim. Tanisha Gibbs.
Yes, hello.
Have a winner. Let's go.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Tanisha Gibbs, and I am the Director of Policy and Youth Advocacy for NJSAC. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony before the New Jersey Reparations Council. New Jersey currently relies solely on federal funds to support working families' access to after-school, summer, and out-of-school time programs. This reliance has become even more precarious due to the recent federal grant freeze initiated during the current administration. New Jersey has made significant investments in childcare, helping to build a continuum of care that supports children from cradle to career. However, critical gaps remain that disproportionately affect working families in underserved communities. According to a 2024 Gallup report, low-income families access after-school programs at just 38% compared to significantly higher rates among upper middle-income families. For every child in an after-school program in New Jersey, 3 more are waiting for access, and costs for school-age childcare in New Jersey can reach as high as $17,213 per year, averaging 11% of a family's income. These gaps represent a serious equity issue. Every child in New Jersey, regardless of zip code, whether they live in Patterson or Parsippany, deserves access to high-quality after-school and out-of-school time programs. And as a result, New Jersey is now in an urgent position to address these gaps. As the state considers reparations and reinvestment in communities most harmed by the history of systemic discrimination and the criminalization of drugs, it is imperative that funding is directed toward programs that directly benefit youth development. A key strategy in achieving that is using tax revenue from adult use cannabis in order to expand access to after-school and out-of-school time programs. And we have seen through Rutgers Eagleton polling that use of that is a high priority for education. Critical services that provide positive alternatives to risky behaviors, enhance social and emotional development, and combat the challenges facing youth in historically underserved communities. Communities hit hardest by the war on drugs have faced decades of economic hardship, lack of educational opportunities, and disproportionate criminal justice involvement. Reinvesting in these communities through targeted support for after-school and out-of-school time programs is an effective and meaningful form of reparations. What some other states are doing. So across the country, states that have legalized cannabis have already directed revenue from cannabis sales to support after-school and out-of-school time programs. And we know that Senator Ron Rice, who was a big supporter of and really
15
a
seconds.
catalyst behind the New Jersey Reparations Council, he also supported out-of-school time programs. And you can see that from the bills that he initiated on the state level that reflect as such. Thank you for my time.
Thank you so much for those offerings. And, you give us also, you are proactive in your comments to think about the revenue sources for which reparations could come from. And while cannabis tax is certainly one of those, New Jersey could pull, from various tax revenues that it does have. Everything from you could impose a corporate reparations tax, a vacant property tax. There are various ways that that revenue could be generated, the gambling revenue within the state as well. So I appreciate you offering that, and also for grounding a specific, calling for a specific response to, childcare reparations and, funding for after-school programming and is sustaining Black families.
Thank you. And so I think we have time, we have one more. Is X Brathwaite on the line? On the call? X Brathwaite? If not, we will turn it back over to Jean-Pierre.
Can you repeat the question?
Just want to say thank you to all of you who provided public comment. And for those of you who did not get opportunity or you would like more time to provide public comment, I just want to reiterate, please go to njreparationscouncil.org. This may be our last public session, but the work is not done. We will have a public event on Juneteenth of this year, Thursday, June 19th, where we will release the final report of the New Jersey Reparations Council with our final recommendations. So please join us and be on the lookout for invitations for that. I once again want to thank the Public Education and Narrative Committee for their wonderful presentation, for their expertise, for their time, and for their masterful way of handling all your questions. I also want to thank Khalil for the wonderful job of moderating. I want to thank the Just Strategies team. And I also just want to let you know that our work is not done with the report. The Institute and the New Jersey Reparations Council will continue to advocate for the report. We will organize, we will public educate, and we will do the work of making reparations real here in New Jersey. And so be on the lookout for ways to join us in this work, and we will make the report accessible to broad audiences in various and multiple ways. I want to thank you all for your time this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you all have the rest of a good week, and I hope to see all of you in June. So thank you so much, everyone. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.